Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Whitney Stoll. I'm your DC Post President, and welcome to our September First Friday webinar. Thank you all for joining us here today for Security Considerations for Building Design with our presenter, Ryan Searles, the Security Consulting Group Leader from IMEG. Joined by me is Samantha Long, who is behind the scenes running the DC Post slides and will be monitoring the chat for our webinar today. So we have over 100 registered participants from all over the world ready to learn about today's First Friday webinar. So please join me in welcoming our guest presenter. So Ryan Searles specializes in security and protective design to mitigate active shooter events, assaults, civil unrest, and other design and cost-effective solutions for avoiding the potential loss of life and providing an overall robust security program. In today's program, you'll learn about security considerations in building design to help you plan your next project while understanding current market trends and differences to protect occupants and mitigate security issues. But first, I'd like to start our program by introducing you to our First Friday webinar series, which is provided to you through SAME's commitment to offering the AEC community effective training, development, and networking programs. The DC Post is helping sustain the future of the profession with these monthly education-focused sessions to deliver topical and relevant content to our industry. So thank you all for joining us here today and as we start our program. Next slide, please. So feel free to use the chat, introduce yourself, share your LinkedIn profile and contact information to everyone throughout the presentation. Ask questions so we can address them during the Q&A portion of the event. Also, for those using the web app application, you have the option to save the chat anytime, just going up to File and then down to Save Chat. You may have noticed we are recording this session. We will post a webinar on our YouTube channel later on this month and send you the slides as well as your PDH certificate on Monday after the webinar. So we're glad we can offer you an hour of education and virtual networking regardless of where you're calling from. Next slide, please. So let's start with a moment of silence to remember our active duty military, first responders, and all who need our care and thoughts throughout the world right now. Thank you. And now will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'd like to take a moment to thank our DC Post First Friday sponsors, Fox Rothschild and Parsons Corporation. We truly appreciate your support and are grateful for your generosity by making this webinar series possible. Your support helps us meet our society's goals, including providing educational content for our members, industry and government engagement, building resilient communities, connecting with our future leaders through our student and young member groups, enriching the STEM pipeline, and preparing our military and veterans for life after service. If you're not already a DC Post sponsor and like to support our post with an annual sponsorship, we'd love to add your name to the slide for future programs and events this year. Annual Platinum sponsors and First Friday sponsors help support this webinar event with free registration for SAME members and full-time students. Please visit our website for more information about sponsorship levels and how you can get back to the SAME community through your DC Post sponsorship. And now it's time for the main program. Please note this program provides one professional development hour from the DC Post. So look for an email with the subject line document delivery from DC Post and Eventbrite with a copy of our program slides, your PDH certificate, and a list of opt-in attendees who pre-registered for the session. We are recording this webinar and we'll post a video on our website later on. So I'm not going to read to you the learning objectives on the slides since most of you saw the same objectives when you registered. Instead, I'm going to introduce to you our featured speaker in just a moment. When I do the introduction, if you haven't done so already, please use the chat to introduce yourself, share contact information, and where you're from. This is your webinar series to help you learn about the special topic, as well as help you expand your business network during the program. Use the chat throughout the presentation, share comments, ask questions to Ryan. If there's a particular slide you'd like to talk about, please share those details in your chat question. We'll answer the questions in the chat at the end of the program. And don't forget to save the chat before you exit. And now, please, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Ryan Searles. Is a security consulting group leader at IMEG. He specializes in security assessment and protective services, including active shooter mitigation and response and crisis management. Ryan leverages his expertise and certifications to provide various types of security assessments, CPTED design services, security design, crisis management, active assailant, life safety, and enterprise-wide security and risk management services. So welcome, Ryan, and now I'm going to turn the program over to you.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yep, you're coming in loud and clear.
Awesome. All right, so just like we said, we go over some security considerations for building design. We're hearing about it more and more. We're getting asked more and more from clients, so it's a good thing to cover. Just some background on IMEG at a glance. Don't want to get too much into it, but if you're not familiar with IMEG, we do have a lot of offices around the DC area. We are a very large engineering firm that has all sorts, as you can see, core services and specialties within it. If you have any questions, you can ask at the end. Some of our locations, so you can see we're pretty well spread out across the nation. Now, what I end up doing for IMEG is I came in some years ago and stood up our security consulting group. And before I was on board, and still today we hear in the A&E industry, the first things we think of when we hear security is cameras and access control. And that's very normal. There's a difference between security, what we call security advisory, security consulting, and security engineering, where you find security engineering is more the systems, right? That's the designing of the systems. What does the other side of the house do? And we'll get into that. And they need to, and you'll hear me reference this a couple times, it needs to be a holistic approach to how we're designing projects for safe and secure buildings and not just cameras and access control anymore, which is what I call it's more of a bolt-on afterthought, right? What is physical design? We hear physical security all the time. And again, most of the times it's cameras and access control we think of. Well, when it comes down to it, physical security design and physical security systems really require a methodical approach. That approach has to start very early on, even in concept. When I first started doing this, I would get called by architects and they're like, "Hey, Ryan, come help us out. We need this, and that." Okay, what phase are you guys in? Oh, we're in construction. And I'm like, guys, I can't do much. Like, we need to get involved earlier on. And I'll go over why that is. But, a lot of that is we need to consider more than just that bolt on afterthought, right? Of where we're placing systems. Physical security involves people, it involves procedures, the technology that goes in, landscaping, all sorts of different things that can help prevent, respond, and stand back up if an emergency event happens. Um, and what does that mean? Is it means everything we do with security design and security approach to projects has to be very specific to that client, to that market of um, structure we're designing, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, industrial. It all depends. What is the area we're putting it in? What level of crime do we have? What is a standoff? Is it rural? Is it urban? All these different things matter. And what is the posture as far as security we're trying to achieve and we need to have, and what's realistic for what the building needs for the area we're putting it in, and what are our threats, right? It has to be specialized for those clients. It cannot be cookie cutter. Nothing we do can be cookie cutter because it doesn't fit all the clients. um, this is a school we had to do. And a little background on myself, I also taught at the National Center for Active Shooter for some years. And so have a very in-depth background with active shooter response, prevention, training, drills and rehearsals, all sorts of different aspects. And so this was a school, and the architect came to me and said, the school district and us want an open floor plan. And In the middle of the school was one of those very large, like collaborative learning staircases. And I said, okay, now the first thing that goes through my mind with K-12 and we want an open floor plan is, okay, if there's an active shooter, active assailant, like how are we performing our lockouts? How are we performing our lockdowns? And there is a difference. How are we drilling this? What are we doing? Where are safe places for kids to barricade themselves into? And all these things we have to think of and consider while designing with, yes, it needs to stay looking and feeling like an educational institution, but at the same time, we can't design an unsafe building. So what is the goal we're trying to hit? Realistically, what do we need to worry about? And then we can really start working together as the design team of having a holistic approach that has a great aesthetic feel to it. It still looks and feels like an educational institution. We haven't turned it into a prison because that's the last thing we want to do, and work together, but it has to start very early on and there has to be special considerations. You'll notice the other thing about this building that's up here right now on the slide is there's a daycare, and the daycare was external to this school. Um, daycares bring their own kind of issues when we think about them. They have um domestic, you can have more domestic violence there. You have parental kidnappings, you have all sorts of different things you have to consider and worry about. So these are some of the things we have to deal with. So it'll really start with assessment work, um, both on a new design and an existing facility. Existing facility assessments are, okay, we're going to go in and perform vulnerability gap analysis, and let's see, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Where are you vulnerable? Where are your gaps? How do we design to start mitigating those and closing those? Security is completely a game of mitigation. If any security consultant tells you, well, I can make this place 100% safe, they're lying to you, or they just don't know what they're talking about. They can't. If someone wants to walk in with a gun one day and do something bad, they're going to do it. But what have we done in our design to prevent that? What have we done in our design to respond to that type of event if it happens? And then what have we done in our design or considered in our design to aid in post event stand up and getting back to business as soon as possible? Kind of that resiliency side. Now, with a new design, we can do assessments as far as threat. When we're looking at this design, what are our known and unknown threats, and how do we design to protect this new structure against those? Vulnerability and gaps, you can definitely go through that in more SD and DD in schematic design and design development. You can do a vulnerability gap analysis on drawings. 100% you can do that, um, and figure out, okay, what are we missing? Where are we still open? And really start diving in those, and then start doing some reviews and changing some stuff up. Way better again to do that in SD than to try to do that in construction or in CA. And then getting a report to the client that really identifies those weaknesses, and not just identifies weaknesses, but gives recommendations on how to fix them. Um, I go into places all the time. They're like, look, hey, we just had a security assessment done. We have this 400-page document and we have no clue what it says. And we hear that all the time. And making sure reports, if you're having a security assessment done, or let's say a DD review or SD review of what's going on with the building and if it's secure, what we need to change, reports should have actionable items that drive projects or drive goals to change certain things. You shouldn't be reading a report and have no clue what to do next. So reports need to be very clear and concise. Always helps with I like with ours, We do a lot of cost estimating too. That always helps clients and helps budget wise, knowing on a project what we need to be looking at. So reports should have very specific items in them as well, not just where your gaps are, but other items as well. Some of the trends we're seeing is definitely more and more architects and design teams are getting consultants involved earlier on. We're seeing that a lot earlier now in education, in healthcare, government, all market sectors, pretty much across, even multifamily housing. You're seeing consultants get involved a lot earlier. A lot of that is we live in crazy times, to be blunt. There's more shootings, there's more acts of violence are on the rise, there's more civil unrest, protests, all sorts of different stuff. Um, for years and years in my career, when I was in the military and then either working for the for the government or contract for the government afterwards, um, it's kind of a reactive world, right? We're reacting to something happening, and then we're going to put boots on ground. Um, United States as a culture and as a whole is very reactive, where a lot of times it takes an event to happen for someone to go, okay, yeah, we need to fix that. Where we've known we've needed to fix it, just usually takes an event to happen for people to start funding it and fixing it. I like seeing that architects and owners are getting consultants involved much earlier now, because it's starting to show that people are becoming more proactive and they're approaching safety and security from a more proactive stance and trying to include these things in buildings when they're designed early on. And really that keeps the occupants safe and secure inside, right? So it's a good move we're starting to see in the market of more consideration for safety and security. Now, with those considerations for safety and security and how we implement them, we need to know not all buildings are the same. Education and healthcare, very specifically. I'm not going to design a healthcare facility or a school the same way I would a SCIF in a government facility or a prison. We just can't do that. Educational facilities, whether it's K-12 or higher ed, need to keep those that look and feel. The same with healthcare. We don't need to turn those environments into prisons. Um, Natural light is very important to the learning process. Natural light is very important in healthcare, especially when we're dealing with behavioral health and other type of items. So it's how are we designing so that the environment is still conducive to the purpose and the function of that building, but that security is front of mind. And a lot of times we just have to be more creative. CPTED is huge. If you're not familiar with CPTED, PTED, CPTED is crime prevention through environmental design. And it's great for designing physical elements, landscape, all sorts of different colors, textures, feels, all sorts of different things that can influence safety and security and bringing it into the design. With CPTED, it's more the natural elements where we still need cameras and access control. Where cameras are electronic surveillance, we can do a lot of things with design to increase natural surveillance. Where access control is our electronic side of access control, card readers and stuff like that. What about natural access control? How are we guiding individuals to go where we want them to go? Utilizing landscape and the way we're doing hallways and colors, and how are we influencing the mind subconsciously to have people go where we want them to go? Celebrated front entryways, all sorts of different things. So you're seeing crime prevention through environmental design utilized in a very cohesive way with the systems and electronic side, but they need to mesh together and it needs to work with the operational side of the building as well. And operational security is a huge impact and a lot of things people forget when they're designing of how is this operationally impacting the owner of the structure And what does that change as far as manpower, policy, and procedure and everything else? So we have to consider CPTED and electronic with all those different things while we're designing buildings and structures. I always like to start from an outside approach. So safety and security starts on the perimeter. If we only start considering security at the front door, then we've already lost. Again, security is a game of mitigation. So think of it like a filter, right? At the property line, how much safety and security issues can we mitigate at the property line? Is it 5%? Is it 10%? What are we doing for those territorial boundaries? And this isn't just fencing. I actually am not a big fan of fencing. Um, I call it the castle model, and I'll get into that later. But, fencing has its place when it has to be done, but this isn't just fencing. What do we could achieve very similar territorial boundaries with landscape, whether we're using hostile vegetation, non-hostile vegetation. What are we doing for lighting, for parking lots, the grounds? Like all of those have different filters of what percentage of safety and security issues can we mitigate at each one of these levels, and thinking concentric rings of security as we hit from the perimeter all the way into the building. Inside, you're looking at vestibules, front desk design. We do a ton of lobby design for places because that's huge. That's where, how are we guiding people into the building through a safe front vestibule where they're getting checked in? We know they're being entered into visitor management systems, which then is communicating with our mass communication, mass notification in case there's an emergency happens. And we're able to track everybody that's in our buildings and moving around our space. That's something we need to be doing. So there's all these different levels of things we need to be able to consider when we're designing, but it has to start at the property line, and we have to consider an outside-in approach. Why start early in on the design, like I had brought up earlier, is cost. I mean, in our line of work, time is money. The longer we spend on a project, the less efficient we are, especially with the budget we have. So if we get security consultants and security involved early on, then it gives us the ability to adjust and change. We all work with owners and clients that change their mind 1,000 times on a design or what they want or how they want something to go. So if we start early on in the process, it gives us the ability to adjust once they start changing their mind, and it gives them a first early look at their posture and security of what's needed for that building, so they can start kind of chewing on that fat to see if they like it or if it needs a change. And if it needs a change, we can still accomplish the same level of security. We just might have to be more creative with how we achieve it. Cohesive systems. It gives us a big early start on how are we picking cohesive systems and what systems are we choosing. We're working on some very, very large healthcare projects right now around the country where, depending on the new thing everybody's putting in is weapon detection, right? We're seeing that in education. We're seeing that in healthcare. We're seeing that all over. People are putting in weapon detection systems. Depending on what system you put in and how you want it to talk with your other systems, depending on what weapon detection system I'm putting in, depends on how your entryways and your areas of ingress and egress, how wide they need to be to fit those systems. It also, if I'm putting in weapon detection, and that cohesive system needs to talk to visitor management and everything else, it's going to completely depend on how we're designing operationally for that space, for a secondary search area, if someone pings hot, for all sorts of different things. So it gives us the ability to start picking systems and make sure our dimensions in our design fit those systems as well. And then, like I said in the beginning, it gives us the ability to adjust. We can adjust fire when we need to and be able to move on from there. Now, here, I'll go on my rant about fencing. So I'm seeing this a lot right now with education and healthcare and some other markets too. But everybody's putting fences up, and I call it the castle model of like where we put a wall around our castle and now we're safe. It's not necessarily true. Um, if you look at, you have to understand what the fight looks like that we're trying to design again, like to protect against. If you look at any active shooter response in the United States, whether it's run, hide, fight, avoid, deny, defend, Alice, any of the others, the number one goal is to get out and get away from the building, avoid or run or any of that. If we're putting fencing around schools and other things, we're keeping people in that property. The other thing we're doing is we're keeping the shooter in the property. We want the shooter to squirt, meaning leave the objective. Just like when you squeeze an orange, the orange squirts, right? When law enforcement squeezes that objective, we want the bad guy to squirt away from that area, because if they're out away from shooting people in that confined space, we can handle them out in public space. That's fine. But we want them out of that confined space. We're keeping the shooter in the area too by putting fencing up. The other thing, when we look at it from a first responder standpoint, and I can say this from a law enforcement background, first responder standpoint, when we show up to events, we park horribly sometimes. And if you only have a single point of entry with stuff fenced off, you're going to be jamming up that entry point. If we're looking at an emergency event with a mass cow situation, mass casualties, that's probably going to mess up our triage, our evacuation of casualties, all sorts of stuff, because ambulances aren't going to be able to get into the area. So we have to know what the fight looks like that we're trying to design to protect against, but we can't be hurting the first responder point, the what actually happens during that style of event. So we can do fencing if fencing is needed, like government facilities and other stuff. A lot of times fencing is needed. We can do fencing. It just has to be designed the right way. So I'm not against it, but it just has to be designed the right way. Lighting is huge. I've always been taught my whole life, and I teach my guys, darkness empowers bad people to do bad things. Light it up, light up those areas. But we also have a happy medium there of how much is enough light without causing light pollution, right? And how are we lighting up certain areas without just making it look like we live on the sun? So we have to find that happy medium, but lighting is a good thing, especially when it comes to safety and security. Camera coverage. Where are we putting cameras? I go to buildings all the time now where I have cameras looking at another camera, or a camera looking at a wall, or a camera looking at a bush. And I'm like, guys, who did this? They're like, oh, our security people. Okay, well, who are your security people? Oh, the technology people that came in, or oh, the integrator that came in and installed. Okay, those aren't security dudes. Those are technology people. That's why you have a camera staring at the corner of a wall. Placement, make sure placement's huge. Realize when we put in cameras into a new design, the vegetation we're putting in is going to grow. So in 3 years, is it going to block our views? Where are we putting cameras? Still today, we walk into buildings and generally we can cut down a client's cameras, the number of cameras they have, by 20 to 30% by putting in different types of cameras. So again, what kind of technology are we picking? Where's our placement? Does it work with our design? Does it work with our landscape? Does it work with our lighting? A lot of times at night, lights will flood out cameras. So we got to consider all those different things. Same thing with access control, not just electronic, but natural. What are we doing? Where are we putting it? Go into buildings a lot today, and we need access control on every door. Why? To date, no active shooter has ever breached a solid core door that's locked. So why are we putting access control on everything? Most of the time, a solid door with a good lock that can be locked utilizing a gross motor skill, because humans start losing fine motor skills during stressful events at 90 beats per minute in their heart. Their gross motor skills are in peak performance. So let's pick a good solid door with a lock that can be utilized using gross motor skills to lock it. Chances are, if we play these stats, you're good. All right. So it's, again, what does that fight look like? What are we trying to design to, and to what standard? Mass communication, great systems, needs to work hand in hand with your visitor management. I'm seeing gunshot detection kind of level out, as far as, a few years ago, more and more places were putting it in. Now that's starting to kind of level out, where that's slowing down, and more places are putting in weapon detection. So weapon detection is a good thing. At the bottom of the screen, that's a picture of someone walking through the Evolve system. There's many different systems out there. They just had the one with the picture you could see someone walking through. So that's the Evolve system. It's a good system, but it's less intrusive than like a metal detector. And you only have to check the people that ping on it instead of checking 10 out of 10, wanding 10 out of 10 people. You only have to check maybe 1 out of 10. So throughput's a lot easier. You're seeing this at a lot of stadiums or places of high capacity. Event centers, schools are putting it in, healthcare facilities are putting it in, government facilities are putting it in. So it's being utilized a lot more in the market. With security and being considered in the design, the building, a good security consultant will know the building that we're designing, it has a purpose, right? It has a purpose. It has a function. We need to stay with that function. It's not up to the consultant to work against that design. It's up to us to work within that design. If we have to change things, we need to change it slightly. We don't need to change the whole design. So how do we work cohesively with the design team, with the architects and designers to really work within their design? And I've said it, a couple times where, sometimes you just have to be more creative. And we have to realize, although we want to maintain the aesthetics, life safety has to be the number one issue. It has to be the number one mission of these buildings. And, I bring up what I call the Columbine effect, where today, when we hear the words Columbine, we only think of an active shooter event that happened in Colorado. We don't think of, that's one of the top high schools in the state. They have an amazing football program. They have amazing educational programs. Their brand has been tarnished. So I always ask design teams like, hey guys, what are we trying to do here? What are we trying to accomplish? And we have to realize if we design a great, beautiful building, but it's dangerous because we haven't considered safety and security, and that was the last thing in our mind, does that tarnish our brand if something happens? I don't know. I don't know if it does. I don't know if it doesn't. But we need to consider that, right? Will they ask the owner, why wasn't this considered during the design process? Why were we left so open? I don't know. We need to consider those things, right? Will that tarnish your brand? And to me, I would say yes, absolutely, 100%. So we have to consider life safety. We have to consider safety and security when we're designing buildings. They can be used together to be aesthetically pleasing, serve the function and the purpose, and still work great and be safe and secure. So we can accomplish both. This is just what I usually look at to mitigate. On the right is the 4-step process. That's Homeland Security's and FEMA's. I'm not recreating the wheel on that. That's theirs. Mine's on the left. I kind of just break it down to 3. What am I doing for prevention? And that's, to me, that's everything from training, what I call the human aspect of security, which is training and awareness, drills, rehearsals, tabletop exercises, all those different things. Prevention can also fall into what have we considered in our design? What are we designing as far as systems and structure and landscape and everything else to prevent emergency events from happening? Response, that can be the same thing too. You can have human aspect in there. What does our policy and procedure say? How do we currently respond? Is it old? Do we need to update it? Are we just using it because so far it's worked for us? And has it worked for us because so far nothing has happened? And we need to consider those things. What are we doing for response? And then design. What have we done within our design to aid in response? Post event, depending on what market that is, that's going to change drastically. Education post event is reunification. It is how do we get butts back in seats learning again? healthcare. It's how do we get back up operational and serving our communities again? That could be the same thing with government. How do we get back up operational and mission ready again? Industrial. How do we get back up operational and producing goods again? So it just depends what market you're in for post event. Very similar missions and goals, but you just got to tweak them a little bit when you're designing or when you're writing policy and procedure or when you're reviewing operationally, what are you doing? These are some other items that you can consider for when you're working with clients, and other items you need to consider when you're designing as well. Like, hey, what is a client? And you can ask this during like planning, master planning concept. Like, hey, currently, what do you guys do for training? What training are you using for tornado, for fire, for earthquake, for active shooter, for bomb threat, for all these different things, right? Um, for riots, for civil unrest, for all these different things. What are you currently doing for these? Okay, what do we need to consider in our design operationally that our design reinforces these? Or are they using some super old training and stuff that they probably need to reconsider that, and our design can help them greatly with that, with updating their stuff. That goes hand in hand with policy and procedure. What are you currently doing for all this? How are you documenting it? How are you doing it? How are you getting it out to employees? Crisis management teams, that's huge. Do you guys currently have one? If you do, let's meet with them. Let's sit down and let's talk. Have you guys run a tabletop exercise? How is your organization currently responding to these events? Have we seen it happen? How does our design help you out? What do you guys need? What is your crisis management team? What would you like to see in this design? Let's do a design charrette. Does it work for you? Social management consulting, that's huge. We're seeing more and more of that with local, state, and federal government, with educational institutions. We're even seeing it with corporate entities now. Of what are we doing to build community relations? What are we doing to manage the homeless population in this area as it relates to behavioral health, drug use, security and safety concerns, all sorts of stuff. Crime. How do we lower crime? Our group just did a security assessment. This was a year and a half ago. Security assessment of 62 parks in LA County, most of which were in South Central and not so low crime areas. And it was, let's look at community programs, do a Sept analysis of these parks. How do we bring safe acts to unsafe areas to put more eyes in the public space to chase away petty crime? How do we get these drug dealers off this corner? How do we do this? How do we do that? A lot of that goes into social management consulting of how do we lower crime in an area, and how do we work with the public and the community to lower crime in an area so it makes our design area, our client, and our structures we're designing safer and more secure. And then very specific industry issues and solutions you have to consider when you get to very specific markets. And then I always leave with, our responsibility, safety, and security of our clients. Having consultants on board can really set you apart as a firm that's making the difference while doing this stuff. And they realize that. Again, they're being more proactive. We're seeing the proactiveness from the owners and the clients a lot more nowadays. So that's good to see. And then I will open it. Generally, we have a lot of questions with this topic. Left about 15 minutes for questions. What questions do y'all have?
Oh, hey Ryan, that was awesome. So thank you very much for the in-depth overview. So everyone, if you have a question, please feel free to enter it into the chat, and we can make sure we cover it with Ryan. But Ryan, off the top of the one of the questions I have are, what are you currently utilizing for security design practices at the moment?
Yeah, so it will be getting in with the clients, kind of analyzing like currently what do they have in place. What are your security practices? Is it just, we do the normal training and that's it, the hour awareness or whatever it is, or the PowerPoint really click for that? Are you utilizing design practices for security, or is it just our security is still cameras and access control folks? And so currently with us, every architectural team we work with, engineer team, design team, it's, hey, how are we doing this from a holistic approach? And that really is seeming like that's the way it's going in the market, and that's the way it needs to be. We have to have a holistic approach because we have to consider so many different things. um, we live in an ever-changing environment, especially when it's dealing with new new emerging and changing threats and security issues. So how are we approaching it from a holistic approach to design?
Great. Thank you. From Mike Brady asks, how do you balance aesthetic, security, and welcoming in a church?
So the church is very interesting, where a church will be, a lot of times churches, unless it's a mega church, doesn't have the budget to hire professional teams, right? So they have church security teams. We do a lot with churches, church security teams. And a lot of that's going to start with training and awareness of who's on your church security team. I've done some training for church security teams where it's, hey, we have a bunch of guys who were veterans, they're during Vietnam and that stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's great. Are they carrying? Oh, yeah, they carry. When's the last time they shot? And it's like, 5 years ago. I'm like, oh God. Okay. Let's let's get them out to the range. Let's start realistically. Again, what is this? What are we trying to protect against? What does that fight look like? And it's, training and awareness, drills, rehearsals. Where are we having them sit? Where are we having them stand? You're not going to put metal detectors and evolve systems in churches. You're not going to do that. So aesthetically, it's going to be having eyes on a threat before it gets into your church. So it's placement of personnel um, during services and the training of those personnel that are there while services are taking place.
Yeah, that is a great question, Mike. Teresa Pullman asks, so the DoD has ATFP standards, and there are also federal standards in the whole building design guide. And are you using those?
Yes, depending on the market I'm working with, right? Is we just did a building, I'll just say for a three-letter agency out in your guys' neck of the woods. And the ATFP standards keep lowering over the past years. I'll be honest with that. They keep lowering them down. And other federal agencies have higher standards. So generally, we're going with the standards that the agency wants to use. So DoD, my whole team, we're all very familiar with ATFP, and we'll utilize ATFP while doing DoD and other agencies that like to use those. But there, a lot of times, there's other clients that have a higher standard, and we have to design to those standards.
Got it. So what about what operational aspects should be considered while designing?
Manpower is huge, because the systems, like we're talking about, some of the weapon detection that everybody's putting in, um, it's like, hey, we need 10 weapon detection systems. Okay, well, you need someone to man each one of those. So that's now additional manpower that you're paying for, that you have to staff for, that you have to do all these different things. So operational impact is, you know, let's say a hospital, patient flow. Are we affecting patient flow? Are we affecting the patient care provider experience on the operational side? Are we not making it as friendly of a place? Are we slowing it down? Sports stadiums or venues with large capacity, operational impact is huge. Is, are we causing people to be out in lines longer? Are we not allowing them to their seats quick enough? Are we causing an unhappy environment? So there's all sorts of different operational aspects we have to consider when designing, and it really, it's going to be market specific.
Got it. And the last question I have is, do you currently consider a holistic security approach In your design, or are you just the camera and access control?
No, currently we do holistic security approach. Um,
Got it.
Now with IMEG, with our firm, we have our own in-house. We have two different very large technology teams that kind of split the country in half. So we have our in-house people we work with all the time to handle the tech side, the security consulting, kind of the holistic approach. But yeah, we we definitely, and I push people all the time to do the holistic approach. It's what it needs to be. Everything from policy and procedure, the human aspect, material security, physical security, your landscape, everything needs to be working together. So to make an environment safe and smooth. The other thing it cuts down on is if you do a holistic approach, it creates a way less of an over institutionalized look and feel, where we don't want that institutionalized look and feel where everything looks like a prison. So we use a holistic approach, and that way you're not just like, it doesn't look like it's thrown up cameras and access control everywhere.
Got it. Tad Davis has a question. As mentioned, most schools and educational institutions have limited budgets. If they could afford, at least initially, only one form of security measure, what would you recommend?
Training and education. Train, rehearse, rehearse. It is the, again, I get from schools, I mentioned the, we need access control on every door. Why? Like, that doesn't make sense. Um, People need to train. I mean, you can look at various other active shooter events, policy and procedure and training in K-12 environment. Um, the schools that focused on training, posture, and things like that mitigated casualties. They could have had a whole lot more during those events, and their casualty count was mitigated because of how well they responded under stress. And responding under stress has everything to do with repetition. It's how often you train and how often you rehearse it. You during a stress response, you're not going to be good at a response unless you train and rehearse. And that's, I mean, most of us who have spent time in the military, law enforcement, stuff like that, repetition is everything. So training and rehearsals are the best things possible.
Got it. And do you do personal training for the
Yeah.
manpower?
Yeah, we do training all the time. It's probably, teaching's one of my loves. So yeah, being able to teach and train, keep people safe. Yeah, that's one of our favorite aspects of our job. Yeah, training.
Great. And Raymond asks, what are some things an entity can do to improve security in an existing facility?
Right away, first thing to do is vulnerability gap analysis. Do an assessment. See where you're at, what current vulnerabilities, gaps you have, and then start closing those gaps. Again, it's a game of mitigation, right? So you may find you're like, holy crap. Then you'll start identifying, okay, we close this gap, we close this gap, we close it. And you start closing those gaps down. And then okay, maybe I'm only 10 to 15% open, and I know where that openness is now. It's here. And then we can address that and we can watch it more carefully, right? Because there is an accepted level of, I just had this conversation with a client the other day. There's an accepted level of risk. If you want to, I'm going to let you be aware of the risk you have there. If you want to accept that risk, that's fine. Is it very low on the risk matrix? Yes. But if someone comes in and does something bad, it's going to have a very high impact. So, how are we looking at risk versus impact and things like that? And how are we mitigating down? But yes, for an existing facility, it's going to be an assessment. Assessments will identify what you need right away.
Got it. Uh, and by the way, Ryan will provide his contact information and email address. So if you want to reach out to him as well, we'll make sure you have that. So if another question pops up later on, you can be sure to reach out. But in the meantime, we have a couple of additional SAME information. Ryan, that was great. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Any other questions come up before we close out? Feel free to put them in. But do want to close out on a couple of SAME items before the end of this first Friday. So, but thank you again, Ryan and IMEG for putting this on. It was definitely a great event. I worked in the lighting industry before this. I totally agree with you on the lighting aspect. It's a huge asset on the security side.
Oh yeah.
But as we move forward, thank you again to Fox Rothschild and to Parsons for sponsoring our First Friday webinar. Our next First Friday session returns on Friday, October 4th, with a special Mid-Atlantic joint event on beneficial ownership information reporting. So starting in January 2024, many companies are required to report information about their beneficial owners and individuals who ultimately own and control the company to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, a bureau of the Department of Treasury. So small and large businesses will learn how to stay in compliance and navigate the regulations. As always, all registered participants earn one hour PDH certificate. So registration is open now. And are you interested in sharing your knowledge on current educational topics for the First Friday webinar series with our members? We are now accepting presentation applications for winter and winter 2025. Visit our website to submit your topic today. Sponsorships are also available to support this popular program. So please make sure to mark your calendar for upcoming DC post opportunities. Would you like to hear the latest on infrastructure policy from agency leaders? So join us on September 19th at the Army and Navy Country Club. I'm sorry, the Navy Club in Farragut Square for the latest updates on policy, planning, and funding from our invited speakers from the Army Corps, NAVFAC, and Space Force. Don't miss out on this in-person luncheon, which will offer 1.5 hour PDH. Registration is open for our annual scholarship golf tournament, which is tee off on Wednesday, October 2nd at the courses at St. Andrews on Joint Base Andrews. One of 3 armed services most challenging champion golf courses. Sponsorship is available for this event. We hope you can join us as we fundraise for our SAME STEM scholarship and engineering and construction campers. Last year, we raised over $55,000 in tuition for our STEM students. You can help make the difference by joining this event. And join us for our fun project tour as we learn about upcoming AEC opportunities at NIH headquarters in Bethesda, and tour the new surgery, radiology, and laboratory medicine building on Thursday, October 3rd. This event is limited to 50 spots, so please register today. And please save the date for the upcoming programs with the DC Post. So we do have the joint conference coming up on October 16th, our annual happy hour at Capo on the 24th, and then we have our luncheon on November 6th, and then our graduation on the December 6th, and then our annual Post and Military Service Branch Awards at the Press Club on January 29th. And then would you like to reach out to a community of 7,000 architecture, engineering, construction, and technology leaders with a DC Post annual sponsorship? You'll have the opportunity to leverage our network and showcase your firm with visibility and international recognition you won't get anywhere else. Support the annual Post sponsorship program like this First Friday series and our regional leadership and mentoring program or individual events throughout the year. So be sure to check out the benefits of sponsoring and supporting the mission of the DC Post and Community Day. And join the national SME community with the largest conference of the year, the 2024 SAME Federal Small Business Conference, November 20th through 22nd in New Orleans. Looking forward to seeing you all there. Take advantage of discounted pricing available through September 26th. And don't forget to book your hotel. Last year, the SBC had over 5,000 attendees, so we can't wait to see you there. So thank you again to Ryan for providing excellent content today on the September 1st Friday webinar. So please look for a document delivery in the subject line, your PDH certificate, an opt-in list of registered participants on Monday, and we will post the recording on our DC website later on this month. So you will get an email from our presenter with more information. And thank you again to our sponsors, Fox Rothschild and Parsons. So that's all. Have a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you out at the next DC Post event. So thank you very much.
Thanks, y'all.